up in puberty for a child who's sexually molested in some form, and we're talking about fondling all the way up to extraordinarily victimization like rape and incest. It happens. I hear these cases in my office. These kids and these grown adults, they come in. And they're also in because everyone in the world that they've heard at least are telling them there's nothing they can do about it, even though they know they were born with heterosexuality. And I tell them a different story, which fits with their belief system. And no, I do not try to change them. That is a misconception, misinformation, a flat-out lie. In fact, when parents bring them in and want me to change their son, and that son says, no, I'm gay, and I was born this way, I tell the parents it's unethical for me to force anything on a child. But the media will tell you that we're hate-mongering and shaming these kids and telling them how defective they are and forcing them into change. And yet, the evidence for that is not there. You hear wild stories in therapy, like, I went to a camp, a religious camp, and they tried to convert me, and they did therapy. They haven't done therapy. Not authentic reparative therapy. So let me tell you what authentic reparative therapy actually is. So you can go back to your homes or report on the internet or report to your readers. Happy for you to do so. Reparative therapy is first fundamentally based on the idea of which most Americans, decreasingly so, but yet still most Americans, believe that homosexuality is not in fact genetic or inborn. This is the foundation of all LGBT issues. I'm not saying this as hatred in any way, shape, or form, but I'm also here to tell you there is no gay gene. And other studies, good studies though they might present to be, I think we need to look at studies that seem to prove if things are inborn or not. That's fine. I'm very open-minded. I want research to take place. But the research is inconclusive. The American Psychological Association freely says this. The most liberal and the most famous psychological association in the country and the world says on their website, there is no gay gene. And they say evidently, which means they don't really know. There seems to be some kind of genetic component and an emotional environment. It's right there. In fact, on this conference, we encourage you to use this is not a don't film us, don't go on the internet kind of thing. Get out your iPhones, do the Facebook Live thing, it's fine. Look it up for yourself, don't believe just me. Go to the APA website. But that story is not being told. It's not in the media at all. And so if something else is going on, especially with my clients, that's causing homosexual feelings, don't you think that they might at least have the right to seek the therapy that they think works for them, in which they actually do experience emotional change? That wasn't a rhetorical question. Thank you. Just like we believe that LGBT persons have the right to seek their own lives and their own form of happiness, their own belief systems. In fact, I'm on record as saying I would fight for your rights of that. But I also have rights. And so do my clients who are children. And so do our churches. So do our families. We have a right to speak what we believe is the truth. And we look at evidence. We want to stay out of judgmentalism and into truth and compassion. And that's what happens in my office. So when a guy in my office, my clientele is usually young, from 15 to 29. And these guys are coming in because they've been emotionally traumatized as children by, sometimes it's peers, being bullied out the wazoo and being shamed in their sense of masculinity. We're not talking about just the simple kind of, oh, I kind of don't feel like a guy today. We're talking about severe cases of emotional abuse and or sexual abuse, and not any severely unmet needs for affirmation of identity, approval, in other words, unconditional love, and affection. So this boy begins to tell me, you know, my father didn't touch me until I was 13 years old. Do some of you guys have kids, or have had kids, little boys, little girls? Can you imagine if you never touched them until they were 13? What if you had a little girl? What if you were a mom, and can you imagine going through life and never touching your little girl, holding her in your arms? Can you imagine those of you who had good fathers and you kind of knew what they were doing? All right, nobody's perfect, but you know, and they held you. You remember that when you were a kid? Maybe a tear comes to your eye. That doesn't happen for many people who come into my office. Some boys just aren't really touched, and so they get isolated, and they are subject to shame-based messages. And they start to begin the long line of decades-old severe gender identity inferiority. And it starts early on, even as early as 1.5 to 2, during when, you know, the developmental years, the first developmental years for gender and sexuality. And that's why a lot of folks, we believe they were born that way, because they've always remembered this kind of I'm different kind of thing. But below that I'm different is always, in my opinion, in my experience, below every single, and I mean every single homoerotic attraction, I have an open mind, I'm waiting for the client to not come in with this, but so far every one of them has some level of, underneath the homoerotic impulse, very deep sense of gender identity inferiority, even if it's neglect and they just don't get what they needed their whole childhoods, and or severely unmet 3As, as we like to call them, that I just mentioned. Let me explain it in 21st century computer terms. If it's true that we're all programmed, or if all men are programmed, I'm going to talk mainly about men this morning, this afternoon. If it's true that we're all programmed for masculinity, and it's in our genes, and we're male, which is genetic, that's genetic. If we don't have that subjective, marvelous experience of what it feels like to be secure in our own bodies as boys and men, then our programming gets shut down. But we can't not be a man. That's genetic. So the body knows how to throw into the mix masculinity any way it can get itself fulfilled as a programming. And that's when, usually about the age of puberty age, that's when masculinity, instead of something that feels subjective and wonderful experience, it becomes an object. And so at that point, the only way maleness can be experienced is in the body of another man. That's how it triggers into sexuality. Long story, complicated more than that, but that's the short version. And that's why, for, I would say, most homosexual men, that's what's at the bottom of homosexual feelings. That's why these feelings come up, because in a sense, it's unconscious, but in a sense, it's a huge drive to get those needs fulfilled. But remember, they get that programming shut down, so it makes their automatic emotions move over to the erotic. Because that's the only way some men know how to be loved. And it starts so early, and they grow up. And then they're told that that's who they were born to be. In reparative therapy, what happens is, to make a very long story short, and over a amount of time, we go below through body work, emotional work. Every single one of these guys, I don't tell them what to feel, never do that. Never, ever do that. We discover automatically those feelings of grief and longing, heartache, shame. Doesn't it sound tough to you? When you look at a guy on the street who you know to be gay or homosexual, the first response that should be is compassion, because now you know what that kid or what that man is dealing with. I don't care if he's the most activist LGBT person in the world, now you know. It's too late. You can't go back. Remember, he was a little boy, and he got shamed to death or abused to death. And these feelings came up. And if he wants to believe he was born that way, he has every right to do so. But now we turn to what we have a right to believe, and that is evidence-based truth. Now, the American Psychological Association, in their task force report on sexuality and change efforts, on page 82 and 83, they said, which the news isn't ever telling me, they said there is, quote, there is no proof of harm. The two arguments why people are so much